continuing on now with our next factor of soil formation. Again, we jumped the order a little with parent material to tie in a little with where we were at with our lab and connect a little to our previous material. But now we're going to basically work our way through the other four. Our next factor is climate. And climate is arguably the most influential factor of soil formation. It always depends, but climate is hugely important because it is kind of a two-part factor. There's more to it than just some of the others are kind of focused. It's got multiple things going on that are all influential on soil properties. The main climate variables are temperature and precipitation, and both of those have big impacts on weathering processes, soil forming processes. So temperature and precipitation, don't think the P and the T in CLORPS are for these two. They're all wrapped into climate, but both very important factors. And then there are a couple other things that we're going to get into, climatic variables that are kind of a function of these in part. Effective precipitation, we'll spend a little time getting into this, so don't worry if it's not quite clear just yet. But it's how much of the precipitation is actually available for soil formation. How much of that, just because we have 3 inches of rainfall, doesn't mean all of that is going to work on the soil in the same way. So we'll look at those details. And then evapotranspiration. That has to do with the loss of water from the soil. So water falls through precipitation, but depending on relative humidity and hours of sunlight and time of year, there's a lot that goes into how much water is then removed through evaporation directly, just solar radiation causing the water to evaporate, and transpiration, how much plants are using. So it gets complicated, but we'll talk about it in some general terms. So for effective precipitation, that's what we are really interested in when it comes to soil formation. Precipitation, we can put out a rain gauge and measure exactly how much rain falls, but we want to know how we need to modify that to think about its actual impact on soil development. So we're going to look at 4 components of effective precipitation, and the first one is that evapotranspiration, evaporation and plant use. So if we have a given amount of waterfall, and that's represented by the width of this column here, and you can see that they are the same on the left and the right. We're getting the same total precipitation. The rain gauge measures the same amount of rainfall, but if we have high evaporation, so low shade, lots of direct, intense sun, this will connect also with temperature. If we have high temperatures, that's going to cause high evaporation. If we have high plant use, so if corn might use a lot more water than wheat, a tall grass prairie might use more water than a sagebrush. So depending on your plant community, you're going to have different plant uses. On the left here, we're doing a high ET, high evapotranspiration scenario, which doesn't leave very much water to make its way through the soil, right? Just this skinny little arrow. A little water made its way through. That water that actually gets all the way through the soil, that's where you're going to be actively changing the soil, allowing our processes of soil formation to take place. All of those that use water to transport and transform things and remove things from the profile, that is happening with this effective rainfall. Not very much in this case, whereas if we're only pulling off a little water through evaporation and plant use, there's a lot more left over to work through the soil. Low evaporation, low plant use, we'd expect greater development. Now there are other things, that's assuming equal rainfall. Sagebrush, it uses less water, but it also tends to be in drier climates. So you can't, it becomes multi-factors that you have to worry about. But if the precipitation is equal, higher plant use means less soil development, less effective rainfall. Our next thing that can modify precipitation is topography. If you are on a level site, then you don't expect a whole lot of water running off, right? It's not on a slope, so it just kind of works its way through. So if this is 1p, at the bottom we have 1p. This is ignoring all of the evaporation and everything else. But we're going to assume those are all the same on all of these sites. If you get down onto the side of a hill, maybe this is the top of a hill, a summit, as we're going to define a little later, but you get onto the back slope, the steep part of a hill, and some water is going to move in, but some water is going to run off because you're on a hill and water will run down the hill, which means you have 1p hitting the surface, but maybe we have 0.7p that actually infiltrates and makes it through the soil. Those are just kind of arbitrary numbers, but less, right? Less is getting through. If you're at the bottom of a hill, we still get that 1p, but we are actually adding in everything that ran off the side of the hill, right? So now we actually have more effective precipitation at the bottom of the hill than we had at the top or on the middle. We're getting more precipitation than even hit the surface because we're receiving that runoff. So topography can influence rainfall. Permeability, especially when you're on a hill and there's that potential for runoff. If it's highly permeable, then like in a sand, maybe not a whole lot actually runs off and the topography doesn't matter so much in a high leaching soil. But if you're in a clayey soil, low permeability, you're going to have a whole lot more running off, and so that's going to be more limiting in terms of what can move through the soil. It also, if it's slowing down the water, it might be more hanging around longer for evaporation and plant use, so it might actually be subject to greater loss in that way as well. All right, our last modification to precipitation to get at our total effective precipitation. This one's often the most confusing, the least intuitive, but it's also can be really important, and that is distribution. So the case on the left is, here's our monthly precipitation for 12 months. Let's call this, let's call it 0.5p. Over here on the right, we've got our monthly precipitation, but for only 6 months. And we're going to say our total annual is the same. So let's say 1p times 6 months, we've got 6p is our total precipitation. Whatever those units are here, 0.5 times 12, also 6p, right? So the same total rainfall. But on the left, it's falling all year long, but half as much in the wet months. On the right, it's only falling for half of the year, but those wet months are twice as wet. Because our evaporation and plant use are the same in either scenario, we're going to subtract off, let's say, 0.2p here and 0.2p here, and we're going to keep them the same on this side. Then every month, we only get 0.1p making its way through the soil for a total of 1.2p effective rainfall in the year. On the right here, 1 minus 0.2 minus 0.2, we've got 0.6p that actually makes it through. It only does it 6 times, right? It's half as frequent, but the amount that actually makes its way through is greater, so we end up with 3.6p. In this scenario, it's triple the effective rainfall by having bigger storms but less frequently. I think intuitively, if you imagine taking all of the rain in San Luis Obispo and dividing it by 365, and say that much rain fell every year, how much of that rain would ever make it to the bottom of the soil? It would all evaporate every day. By the end of the day, you would have lost everything, right? There's just a tiny amount of, a couple millimeters of rain a day. It's just going to evaporate off the surface. Nothing's going to work its way through. If instead you had all of that rainfall happen on one day, you have massive flooding, but lots and lots of water making its way through the soil. The rest of the year it's dry, but the effective precipitation, how much actually gets through the soil, would be much greater. So I know this can be a little more confusing. You would think, well, less frequent rainfall, wouldn't that be less? But it maybe counterintuitively actually ends up being more, as long as the total sums up to the same. So if it's less frequent but more intense, that's greater effective precipitation and more profile development. Temperature, we'll talk about some of its impacts a little more, but now that we've kind of covered precipitation, temperature, the main thing we're thinking about is higher temperatures, faster reactions, faster chemical weathering. The connection to organisms, to plant growth, that gets a little complicated because if you're hot and dry, that's very different than hot and wet. So you have to kind of take things together. But if we take in for a moment this temperature map, and here's a precipitation map for the United States. Darker blue is wetter, yellows to reds to oranges are drier. If we kind of overlay mentally those two maps, the map I have down on the bottom here is the dominant soil orders in the United States. So there are broad categories of types of soil, and you can kind of see that a lot of these orders ends up being kind of an amalgamation of these two climate maps, right? You can see some of the patterns through the Midwest here sort of follow some of our precipitation bands, right? We've got this really wet zone that kind of lines up with this orange area, and we've got hot and dry areas. So dry, hot, or hot and dry, and that's lining up with this kind of speckled pinkish color in here. The climate, with these two factors taken together, do a lot to determine what your soil looks like. There's a lot of other things involved and intricacies, but climate is important. One point I want to make, what climate? Past or present? Climate is not static. It's something that we are hopefully very well aware of. Climate is changing as we speak, and if you go back to the Ice Age, 14,000 years ago is a long time for us, but not so long for soils. Things have changed climatically a lot over time, so you kind of have to think about that as you're processing what the climatic influence on a soil is. Just as an example, these charts show different cycles that are forcing climate, and there's some patterns to it, but the climates change over time. We're not going to get into climatology just today, but climates change. So stick that in the back of your mind. So we've talked about some of these parameters. What are the actual impacts? And I know that this image is probably a little hard to read, so I'll tell you what it says. Clay formation, slow versus fast. And we're looking at precipitation on our x-axis here. Low precipitation, slow clay development. High precipitation, fast clay formation. So the wetter you are, the faster you produce clays. Makes sense. Water is part of those hydrolysis reactions. So more water, more clay. Next chart, depth to carbonates. Water dissolves carbonates and pushes them down the profile. So if we have high precipitation, we expect the carbonates to be deep, pushed down far into the soil. The black line here is for pH, and it's kind of the inverse of carbonates. Carbonates produce higher pH soils, and so if you have shallow carbonates near the surface, you expect a high pH. And if your carbonates have been washed very deep out of the profile, then you expect a lower pH. So more leaching, more acidic soils. Organic matter, this one gets a little complicated, and this is a temperature graph. With precipitation, you generally expect more water, more plant growth, more organic matter. But with temperature, it's sort of this bowed curve. At very high temperatures, you speed up microbial activity, and they break down organic matter. At very low temperatures, you just don't have a lot of plant growth. The primary productivity that produces that organic matter just not happening very much, and so you have low inputs. So on the left side, there's just not a lot of input. On the right side, there's a lot of output. And sort of in the middle, temperate zones is where those kind of balance out a little bit. And so high organic matter soils are often in more temperate temperature climates. So some visual representations here. This is a gradient from dry to wet. Arid climates, not much carbon in there, not much development, it just kind of looks barely altered. In a temperate climate, we've got a lot of carbon building up in the surface, especially since we've got some grass up here and they put a lot of carbon down in their roots. We've got some carbonates, those white patches are carbonates in the center, so they've been pushed down a little bit, but we've probably got moderately high pH in this zone. Some decent development, some clear changes have happened in the soil, and in very wet climates, there's probably a decent amount of organic matter here, but it's masked by the red color of these iron oxides. You have to have oxygen. You have to have a well-drained soil, meaning oxygen is getting in there, but you also have to have a lot of water moving through to allow the reactions to take place. So these are, over on the right, wet soils, meaning a lot of water, a lot of effective precipitation moving through them. These soils, we'll show you their climate in a moment, but just kind of guess, what do you think? What kind of climate, temperature, and precipitation? And I gave you that quickly, hopefully you had time to think. These are cool and moist. So we've got some organic matter, not a ton building up, some water allowing the plant growth. Temperatures are allowing some plant growth, but it's not a hugely productive ecosystem maybe, so you're kind of an intermediate soil, intermediate development. How about this one? What kind of climate do you anticipate? Pause just a little longer. In this case, how much development do you see? Not much, right? You can barely make out any horizons, nothing really getting darkened by organic matter. This is hot and dry. These are desert soils, hot desert soils. Just not a whole lot of development. How about these soils? Hopefully you can predict the amount of water in these soils, given that it's visible in the bottom of both pits. And that really dark color, these are organic soils. They are cool and wet to the point that they're saturated with water, which is keeping that organic material from breaking down. This one, I'll give you a hint here. That's an ice layer. So, and this is from NRCS Alaska, might be a good indication. This is cold and wet, like frozen and wet. And we're got a lot of organic soil material sitting on top of this ice that is just basically in the freezer. It's frozen in place. Here are a couple more soils. The high weathering, we get low pHs, acidic soils. On the right, a hot and dry soil. So hot and moist gives you acidic soils. Hot and dry, that dry really controls your pH, and so it's going to be a higher pH. We've got some good development, but very different development with those carbonates hanging out in the soil. So that is the summary of climate as a factor of soil formation. In this lecture, we've covered parent material, we've covered climate, we've got 3 more factors to go. Any questions you have lingering that you haven't been able to resolve, or things from your reading, please let me know. Office hours are great. Email, talk with a friend, read the book one more time. Make sure you're feeling comfortable with these concepts, and then we will move on to the other factors in next week's material.